Imagine living in a world where your entire value is determined by how useful you are to someone else. In the 4th century BCE, China was a collection of warring states where survival was a luxury and power was the only currency. Most thinkers of the time were busy trying to fix the world, advising kings on how to rule or soldiers on how to fight. But there was one man who looked at the chaos and decided that the best thing he could be was absolutely nothing at all. His name was Zhuangzi, and while we know very little about his personal life with any certainty, his ideas have survived for over 2,000 years as a radical challenge to how we perceive reality. He lived during a time defined by constant conflict and political ambition, a society where power shifted rapidly and loyalty often led to a quick death. Unlike the famous Confucius, who sought to build a rigid social order based on duty and hierarchy, Zhuangzi was skeptical of any human institution that claimed to reflect the natural order of the universe. To understand Zhuangzi, you have to understand his refusal to play the game. There is a famous story about 2 messengers from the king of Chu who traveled a long distance to find him. They found him fishing on the bank of a river, dressed in rags. They offered him a prestigious position in the government, promising him wealth and influence. Without even turning his head, Zhuangzi asked them a question. He had heard that the king of Chu possessed a sacred tortoise that had been dead for 3,000 years, kept in a silk-wrapped box in the ancestral temple. He asked the messengers if that tortoise would rather be dead and honored in a box or alive and dragging its tail through the mud. The messengers replied that it would surely rather be alive in the mud. Zhuangzi told them to go away because he too preferred to drag his tail in the mud. This story captures the heart of his philosophy. To Zhuangzi, the honors and titles we chase are nothing more than a gilded cage. He compared the life of a high-ranking official to a sacrificial ox. The ox is fed the finest grain and draped in beautiful fabrics, but only so it can be led to the slaughterhouse when the time comes. He chose poverty and freedom over a decorated death, and in doing so, he opened up a way of thinking that prioritized inner peace over external achievement. Zhuangzi is closely associated with Daoism, but he pushed the ideas of the Tao into much more radical territory. While earlier thinkers emphasized harmony and effortless action, Zhuangzi questioned the very foundations of what we call the truth. He believed that our rigid distinctions between right and wrong, or useful and useless, were just artificial constructs. We create these labels to feel like we have control over a world that is constantly changing. But in reality, these labels only serve to trap us. He often used stories and paradoxes to show how limited our perspective really is. He once compared human concerns to the viewpoint of a frog living at the bottom of a well. The frog thinks the small circle of blue above him is the entire sky, and he has no way of imagining the vastness of the ocean. We are like that frog, clinging to our tiny versions of the truth while ignoring the infinite complexity of the universe. Perhaps his most famous story is the one about the butterfly. Zhuangzi dreamt he was a butterfly, fluttering around, happy with himself and doing as he pleased. He didn't know he was Zhuangzi. Suddenly he woke up and there he was, solid and unmistakable Zhuangzi. But then he started to wonder, was he a man who had dreamt he was a butterfly, or was he now a butterfly dreaming he was a man? This wasn't just a poetic thought. It was a fundamental challenge to the idea of a fixed identity. For Zhuangzi, the boundary between reality and illusion was fluid. If our identity can shift so easily, why do we spend so much energy trying to protect it? This perspective led him to a very different view of what it means to be successful. He told a story about a carpenter who saw a massive gnarled oak tree. The carpenter dismissed it as useless because its wood was too twisted to make tools or furniture. But Zhuangzi argued that the tree's uselessness was exactly what saved it. Because it was of no use to humans, no one ever cut it down. It was allowed to grow for centuries, providing shade and living out its natural life. In a world obsessed with being productive, Zhuangzi reminds us that there is a profound safety and freedom in being useless to the systems that want to exploit us. He rejected the idea that humans occupy a privileged position in the universe. To him, life and death, success and failure, were just different phases of the same continuous process. He believed that suffering arises when we cling to one phase and refuse to accept the transformation of all things. When his own wife died, his friends found him sitting on the floor, singing and beating on a drum. They were shocked by his lack of grief, but he explained that he had realized her death was just like the changing of the seasons. To wail and cry would be to ignore the natural law of the universe. The text that bears his name, the Zhuangzi, was compiled after his death and reflects a shifting landscape of voices and perspectives. It doesn't offer a single doctrine or a set of rules to follow. Instead, it encourages the reader to experience the loosening of certainty itself. He didn't want disciples who would memorize his words. He wanted people to find their own way to move freely through the world. During his lifetime, he was likely seen as an eccentric or a failure. He didn't solve political problems or lead a social revolution. But over time, his influence grew among artists and poets who were drawn to his emphasis on spontaneity. In times of heavy-handed government or rigid social expectations, his questioning of reality became a subtle form of resistance. He offered a vision of freedom that went beyond politics and even beyond the self. Today, we live in a world that is still obsessed with labels, achievements, and fixed identities. We are constantly told that we need to be more productive, more successful, and more defined. Zhuangzi's voice is a reminder that meaning might not be found in defining ourselves, but in letting go. It is about allowing life to unfold without those rigid boundaries and learning to laugh at the certainty we once thought was so solid. He invites us to step out of the ancestral temple, leave the silk-wrapped box behind, and find the joy in simply dragging our tails through the mud.